The night air in hell was thick with heat, an ever-present fire that warmed every corner of the city. The skies above were a bruised purple, casting with the glow of neon signs flickering and clackering around the skyline. Beneath the lights, in the dim glow of the private booth, sat Alastor, the radio demon. He sat in a plush red velvet chair, his gloved hands carefully adjusting his microphone in front of him. His smile was wide and unnerving, stretched across his face as he hummed a tune under his breath. He had been calm, collected, his usual perfect self, but in the booth next to him a crackling tension had been building up for days. Across him sat a woman who had come to be his partner of sorts. Her fiery hair, quick-witted demon, with a sharp tongue to match her beauty. Unlike most, she wasn't intimidated by his presence. She dared to challenge him, and that in itself made her interesting. Her name was YN. She was a former mortal who had somehow found herself trapped in hell. It didn't matter that she had no memories of how she got here or even why. What mattered to Alastor was that he had taken a curious interest in her, a soft spot, if you could call it that. What they had was a strange, almost dysfunctional relationship. There were moments of tenderness, moments of pure rage, and those moments when neither of them knew if they wanted to kill or kiss each other. But tonight something had changed. Alastor adjusted the microphone, his radio static crackling with intensity. As he flickered a glance at YN, she was leaning against the glass, arms crossed tightly. Her eyes narrowed and her lips pressed into a tight line. The air between the two of them had been cold for days, their usual playful banter replaced by tense silence. YN, he finally spoke, his voice smooth as silk, but it edged with something darker. What is this all about? Her gaze never shifted from the window. What do you mean? I mean, this. He gestured vaguely towards the air between them. This tension, this distance, you've been so different lately. Different? You don't like me different? Her voice was a mix of sarcasm and bitterness. He chuckled softly, but there was no mirth behind it. I don't like the way you've been acting lately. The constant silence, the cold shoulder, the insistence. What happened to the fun between us? Gwen stood up abruptly, slamming her hands on the desk. You don't get it, do you? Nothing's been the same since you changed. You have become more distant, Alastor, more manipulative, more radio static of a man. The room fell silent. The air was thick with the weight of her words. Alastor's smile faltered for the first time. His eyes flashed a dangerous red, gleaming across his pupils as the static around them buzzed. You dare accuse me of being manipulative, he growled, the volume of his voice reaching with each word. I am the radio demon. I do not answer to anyone, least of all you. Her eyes narrowed, her jaw clenching as her frustration boiled over. That's exactly it, Alastor. You think you're untouchable. You think everything revolves around you. Well, this is about us. Damn it, this is about our relationship. Right now, it's a mess and I'm tired of it. For a moment, he looked at her as if she had slapped him. His brows furrowed deeply. His hands gripped the chair so tightly that the velvet tore under his fingers. You're tired. His voice was low, a dangerous growl, now the static behind him intensifying like a storm about to break. Tired of me? Of us, he spoke. Yeah, I'm tired of pretending I'm okay with everything you do. I'm tired of you pushing me aside and making me feel like I'm nothing more than your little accessory for your show. She crossed the room towards him, her voice rising. I thought we had something real, Alastor, but you've made it clear over and over again that I'm just a game to you, that I'm just a toy in your weird little world. His eyes blazed with fury, and in a single, fluid motion, he stood up from his chair, towering over her. "Don't you ever talk to me like that. I am not your plaything. I am the radio demon, and you are beneath me." Wyatt's face twisted in rage. "Beneath you? You think you could just walk all over me, huh? You think I'll just take your insults and keep smiling? Well, I'm done with that." Her words were like a spark to a powder keg. Alastor's face turned even darker, his smile turning into something far more dangerous. The radio static around them hummed louder, almost deafening with its intensity. He stepped forward, eyes flashing as the air between them crackled with anger. "You don't get to talk to me like that," he snarled, his voice now low, a threatening growl. "You don't get to disrespect me." The room seemed to shudder. The lights flickered violently, the shadows stretching in an unnatural way, as a wave of anger surged from Alastor. And then, in one swift motion, the radio demon's hand came down. It was a slap, a violent, almost brutal slap across her cheek that sent her stumbling back by the force of it. It was enough to make her head snap to the side. The silence that followed was deafening. Ryan's face stung, her cheek burning from the contact. She stood frozen, unable to speak. The sound of the slap seemed to echo through the room, as though even the very air began them held its breath. Alastor stood there, his hands still hovering in the air, his eyes wide with shock at what he had just done. His perfect smile seemed to vanish entirely, replaced by a look of something darker, confusion, regret, or was it just the sheer shock of losing control over himself? Wyatt touched their face, slowly, as if they couldn't quite believe what was going on, or what was happening currently. Her eyes filled with tears, and she blinked them away before they could fall. You slapped me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Alex's mouth moved as though he wanted to say something, anything, but no words came out. He just stood there, paralyzed in his own guilt. Ryan looked up at him, her face a mix of disbelief and hurt. "Is this how you see me now? I'm just some thing you can hit when you're angry?" His heart twisted in his chest, but the knot in his throat made it impossible for him to speak. He started, but the words got stuck in his throat. Ryan backed away, her hand shaking as she wiped her face. "I think we're done here, Alastor." And with that, she turned on her heel and walked out, leaving Alastor standing in silence, his heart beating faster than ever. But Ryan didn't stop walking. Her heels kicking against the marble floors, echoing through the otherwise silent hallway. She couldn't hear the radio static behind her anymore, nor could she feel Alastor's presence looming in the air. It was as if he had evaporated into the shadows of the moment. But his slap left an audible mark on her. Her heart hammered in her chest, each beat was louder than the next as she walked. Away from him, away from everything they had built. The image of his hand coming down her cheek replayed in her mind over and over and over again. Each replay sent a wave of pain through her chest. And not just physical pain, but emotional pain. She thought she knew Alastor, that she had accepted him for who he was. Dangerous, violent, and yeah, a monster, but somewhere along the way she had allowed herself to believe that, despite all of it, they could still make it work. That they could still exist in this twisted, messy world together, even if it was hard. But the slap shattered the illusion in an instant. Tears threatened to fall, but she refused to let them. She wasn't weak. She wouldn't let him see that she could cry, not after everything. She reached the door to her private quarters, slamming it shut behind her with a force that rattled the frame. She pressed her back against it and knees to her chest as she slid down to the floor. Why? She couldn't make sense of it. How had they gone from laughter and teasing to this? The night outside offered her no answers, the same suffocating heat of hell's underbelly. She closed her eyes tightly, willing to let herself calm down. Back in the studio, Alastor stood frozen in place, staring at the spot where Ryan once stood. His breath was caught in his throat as his chest rose and fell, as the weight of what just happened settled around him. She left, His fingers twitched to the sides, a telltale sign of raw anger still boiling inside him. His mind was a storm, conflicting thoughts, and nothing that he could undo what had just occurred. He had hurt her. He had lost his control. The radio demon, the master of hell, the ruler of his domain, is the one who just bent the very air of his will. I hadn't just lost control of himself. He had lost control of a situation. For the first time, the static in his head was deafening and not comforting. Alistair's gaze darkened as he clenched his fist, his eyes narrowing as he heard the sound of the door slamming in the distance. She's gone. He didn't move. He couldn't move. It was like some invisible force was holding him in place, forcing him to confront the hell he had just done. What had he expected? That she would just forgive him instantly? That she would just roll over and accept his anger? No. She had a right to leave. He had crossed a line, and now for the first time in a long while he found himself questioning whether there was anything left to salvage. Wan hadn't moved from where she sat. Her body ached from the tension and the emotional overload that she just stared at the wall across from her. Her mind replaying everything. The fight, the slap, the look in his eyes. It felt like a whirlwind that had torn through her, leaving her in a broken state. But she had always prided herself on her strength, her ability to stand tall in a matter of intensity. But this has shattered her, not because of the slap itself. It was the realization that Alastor had no real understanding of how far he had gone, of how deeply he had really hurt her. And yet the thought of him still lingered in the back of her mind. Why do I still care? She thought. She rubbed her face, exhaling sharply, her heart twisted with anger and confusion, and she didn't want to care. Not after everything, not after what he had shown her. She hadn't wanted to be someone who forgave too easily, but this was different. She wanted to be angry at him, to hate him, and yet a knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She didn't need to answer it to know who it was. Alastor stood just outside the door, his fingers lightly touching the cool wood. He hadn't planned to come here. He hadn't planned to do anything really, but something within him told him he had to. Something compelled him to stand at her door, to make sure things were okay, even if he wasn't sure how. He had tried to convince himself that he didn't need her, that he could just move on without a woman who had entered his life, like a whirlwind, and tore down everything. But in silence, he realized that he wasn't ready to admit it, but he needed her. He closed his eyes and took a breath before knocking again, louder this time. Wyan sat in silence, her hands still resting on her cheek where the sting had faded, but the ache had remained. She didn't want to answer. She didn't want to see him standing there, pretending as if nothing had happened, but something in her heart, a foolish, stubborn part of it, urged her to open the door. She stood up slowly, walking over to it, heart pounding. The door creaked open and she froze when he was there. Alastor's crimson eyes met hers, the usual malice gone from his expression, replaced by something raw. The static that usually crackled around him was almost replaced by something non-existent. It was replaced by an uncomfortable silence. I didn't mean, he started, but his words faltered. He wasn't used to apologizing. He wasn't used to admitting weakness. His hands trembled at his sides for the first time in what felt like forever. The radio demon looked vulnerable. Wan looked down, her gaze hardening, but she didn't turn away. No, you didn't mean to, but you did. Her voice was low and steady. You lost control again. You think I'll just forgive you for that? I don't know what came over me. Alastor speaks. His voice was low and raspy, almost pleading. I was angry. I'm always angry, and I let it get the best of me. His eyes flickered with something unreadable, but Wan, I never wanted to hurt you. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. The rawness in his voice, the desperation in his eyes, it's almost too much, but her heart was still shattered but raw. Should she hear him out, or should she slam the door in his face? The choice is yours.